Friendly Hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got another conference preview edition for you. As today, we're diving in on the Big West. Amanda has joined me for a lot of Big West Conference previews. Connor Hope, he's going to be joining me in segment number 2. We're going to be looking at all now 12 teams in this conference. Very much new look. No longer do we have Hawaii, but now we've got Cal Baptist. We've got Utah Valley. So we'll take a look at the coaching changes. We'll take a look at just some of the changes in general that happened in the offseason and dive in on all 12 of these rosters. Here in the first segment, I'm going to take a look at the betting trends and the styles of play that we've got out here in the Big West. And then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projected or finish for this fine conference. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, the name does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, that is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I do beg with you, I do plead with you, please do send in those Twitter/X questions because it helps me know what you want to hear in the offseason and it makes the offseason go by a little bit faster, and I will not answer the questions during a conference preview podcast. I will do those on the non-conference preview podcast, mainly because I do want these to be as evergreen as possible. Whether you're listening to this podcast in late June, July, August, September, October, just whatever you're doing to get set for the upcoming college basketball season, I want to make sure that you've got good information all ready to go. So how about if we do dive in on a Big West where we've got a lot of ranging styles and some of the fastest teams in all of college basketball. As a matter of fact, the top 3 teams in all of college basketball in terms of total possessions per game, they were out there in the Big West. Cal Poly was number 1, Cal State Northridge, JKC Sun was number 2, Cal State Fullerton was number 3. Now, not every one of these teams plays at quite that fast of a pace, but certainly that did crank it up quite a bit, and you even have a team like a Long Beach State, for example, that was number 44 in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Now, a team like a UC Santa Barbara is a team that is going to slow things down a little bit, but even they were turned 26th last season in terms of total possessions per game with UC San Diego. They were a team that was trying to slow things down a little bit, but even they were up to about 137th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Cal State Bakersfield, meet for the Roadrunners, were actually 19th in terms of total possessions per game last season, but interim coaching regime, things are going to be all sorts of change there. And Gus Argenold, who came over from the non-Division I level over at UC Riverside, cranked them up. They were 83rd last season in terms of total possessions per game. Now, with the 2 newcomers, they are going to be offering a lot of defense. Cal Baptist last year was a pretty mid-tempo team, 210th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Utah Valley is sort of a 40 minutes of HE double hockey sticks sort of team. They were 97th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. So you can get the gist. Very, very much up-tempo teams. And then Sacramento State, they're the other new team that is in this conference as well. 29th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. So these teams like to move it. And with regards to this conference, you've got a lot of teams that are really good on glass. UC Irvine even was a team that was willing to crank up the tempo a little bit more. And for UC Irvine, their main specialty being able to guard down low. For this UC Irvine team, numero uno in the country in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. And it's interesting to take a look at the haves and the have-nots in this conference because you'll notice the teams that did a great job in terms of guarding down low, they were a lot of the teams that were able to thrive, and the teams that did not, well, they were line-based because 3-point shooting is very much hit or miss with regards to the Big West, to say the least. You did have Santa Barbara be a relatively good 3-point shooting team last year, but they were relatively rough with regards to their 2-point shooting percentage defense. They were 258th in the country in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. Long Beach State, one of the teams that were at the bottom of the conference last year, 306th in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. Cal Poly, they were 310th in the country in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage, and this is going to help out a team like Cal Baptist that enters into the conference. They were 34th in the country in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage last year. Utah Valley, another newcomer, they were 38th, and Sacramento State might be a little bit of a struggle for them. They were 340th last season in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage, and then you take a look at a team like a Cal State Northridge. They were a team that was more middle of the road last year, 177th in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. They were able to have a nice surge towards the back half of the season last year. And for UC San Diego, they were a team that was of intrigue as well. They were 72nd in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. that was a massive part of things there, and being able to take care of the ball in this conference is something that not a lot of these teams do a great job of. UC San Diego is one of your better teams in terms of taking care of the ball, 165th in the country in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. Cal State Northridge was a team that was 232nd in the country last year. For as good as UC Irvine is on so many different fronts, they were about 254th in the country in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis on the offensive side of things. And then with regards to a team like a UC Santa Barbara, they were able to do an okay job in terms of being able to make their threes, but couldn't get off a lot of threes. 312th in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. And Utah Valley, it's going to be interesting to see how they fare in this conference. 350th in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis on offense. Top 15 team in terms of generating turnovers themselves. Sacramento State was a team that actually took really good care of the ball up there in the Big Sky last year. 28th in the country in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. You've got a Fullerton team that they were pretty solid in terms of taking care of the ball as well. 78th in the country in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. And in this conference, you also notice that there is quite a few second and third chances to be had. A lot of these teams did suffer on the defensive glass. The teams that were able to limit second and third chances oftentimes had a lot of success. Cal State Fullerton was a nice surprise last year because they were 60th in the country in terms of percentage of opponents' missed shots. That resulted in an offensive rebound. Cal State Bakersfield, they were towards the bottom of the conference. They were 325th with this regard. They allowed opponents to grab 32.4% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. Long Beach State, they didn't allow a lot of second and third chances. They didn't grab too many of themselves. They were 61st in terms of defensive rebound percentage. They were a little bit more of an outlier. Cal Baptist, they were 62nd in the country when they were out there in the WAC conference, so they should be able to have some success right away there. But Sacramento State, I think that might be a little bit of tough sledding for them. 295th in terms of defensive rebound percentage. Even UC Irvine allowed some second and third chances themselves. 198th in the country in terms of percentage of opponents' missed shots. That resulted in an offensive rebound. Meanwhile, a team like a UC San Diego, they were 45th in the country with this regard. And UC Santa Barbara, to their credit, 10th in the country in terms of defensive rebound percentage. And when it comes to taking a look at the totals in this conference, because I mentioned it, boy, oh boy, did you have a lot of up-tempo teams, but you also had a lot of turnovers that were a result of the up-tempo play, but you saw a lot of over teams in this conference. Long Beach State, creme de la creme, 19 overs, 10 unders, and a push, 65.5% hit rate to the over. And then you had three other teams between 56.3 and about 60% to the over. UC Davis, 18 overs, 14 unders. Rest in peace to them, as they are now off to the Mountain West. Cal State Bakersfield meet the Roadrunners, 17 overs, 13 unders. CSUN, Cal State Northridge, 19 overs, 13 unders for them. UC Irvine, even though they played relatively fast last year, they were a great under team, 21 unders to 12 overs. UC San Diego, with just their ability to guard down low, not allow a lot of second and third chances, 20 unders, 12 overs. Cal State Fullerton, 19 unders, 13 overs. They were pretty solid in terms of being able to generate some turnovers as well. And if you look at conference games and conference games only, you did see quite a few more unders when it came to conference play, with UC San Diego and Cal State Fullerton both give you 16 unders to 6 overs in conference play. For UC Irvine, the Anteaters, 14 unders to 8 overs in conference play. And even UC Riverside found their bearings on defense, 11 unders to 9 overs. Your top over team in the conference was Cal State Bakersfield, because, man, they were just playing no defense there at the end under an interim coaching regime, 13 overs to 7 unders. UC Santa Barbara, they were much worse on defense than they typically are, 12 overs to 9 unders in conference play. And then Long Beach State, 12 overs, 8 unders out of them. Most of the other teams were relative even-steven sort of teams. And if you take a look at the against the spread marks that you saw for the Big West, you did have quite a few teams that made a profit for you. As a matter of fact, only 4 teams hit less than 50% of their games against the spread last season. Now, those are of the members that were there last season. We'll get to the teams like Utah Valley and company in a second, but Cal State Fullerton, nice surprise last year, 19, 11, and 2 against the spread last year. Long Beach State was 16, 13, and 1 against the spread, and most of these teams, they were hitting more around about 50 to 55%. UC Davis, who's no longer in the conference, they were hitting at about 55%. Cal Poly, 16, 14, and 1 against the spread. UC San Diego, 17 and 15 against the spread, and then you had 50%, 16, 16, and 1, and 14, 14, and 2 respectively for UC Irvine and UC Riverside. Your least profitable team was Cal State Bakersfield, 11, 18, and 1 against the spread. Just a no good, very bad, terrible season for them. And then you take a look at some of the newcomers for Utah Valley. They were a team that, against the spread last season, they were actually 13 and 18 against the spread, mainly because they were a big favorite in a lot of games and a little bit of a tough time in terms of being able to cover those spreads. Meanwhile, coming in from the Big Sky, you had Sacramento State, who was a team that was pretty much all over the place last year, be 13-15 against the spread last season. Then, with regards to Cal Baptist, the Lancers, a team that represent the WAC in the NCAA tournament, they were 20-14 against the spread last year. And if you do take a look at the over and under rate for Cal Baptist, they were one of your best under teams in all of college basketball. 22 unders to 12 overs last season. Utah Valley was actually a little bit more of an over team because they do like to play up tempo. 17 overs, 14 unders last season. Sacramento State 15 overs and 13 unders last season. And if you take a look in the Big West, because pretty much all teams except for Hawaii were within the state last season, this season it's pretty much going to be all teams except for Utah Valley that are going to be based in the state of California. It makes things interesting with regards to home and road splits because you don't have necessarily the travel to be dealing with, what have you, and as a result, you did see a lot of these teams have a relatively okay run of things away from home. The one team that really had a tough time being able to cover spreads away from home was UC Santa Barbara, 4-9 against the spread away from home. And then you would have Cal State Northridge CSUN go 5-10 against the spread away from home. But UC Irvine was 7-5 against the spread on the road. Fullerton 9-7 against the spread away from home. UC San Diego 7-6. Cal Poly 9-8 against the spread away from home. So a lot of these teams were hovering right around 500. You didn't have demonstrative home and road splits. It's not like teams were amazing. It's not like teams were necessarily terrible. But here's where you found the value with the underdogs. You had a few teams that were really good as a favorite. Fullerton was 7-2-2 against the spread as a favorite. The no longer in the conference UC Davis was 9-5 against the spread as a favorite. And then Cal Poly 3-2 against the spread as a favorite. Every other team 50% or worse. UC Irvine 12-14-1 against the spread as a favorite. UC San Diego 11-14 against the spread as a favorite. CSUN 6-9 against the spread as a favorite. Long Beach State 2-4-1 against the spread as a favorite. UC Santa Barbara, they were 8-14 against the spread as a favorite. And with regards to this conference, I feel like it's become one of the better mid-majors in all of college basketball. And a lot of even Stevens teams in non-conference play. CSUN, UC Riverside, Long Beach State, UC Davis last year were all 5-5 against the spread in non-conference play. UC San Diego was 8-2 against the spread in non-conference play. Fullerton 6-4 against the spread in non-conference play. And then Cal Poly and Hawaii both either went 4-5 or 4-5-1 against the spread in non-conference play. Was a little bit rough for UC Irvine. They went 4-7 against the spread in non-conference play. And then you had Bakersfield go 4-6 against the spread in non-conference play. Santa Barbara, they were 3-6 against the spread in non-conference play, but certainly an interesting divide there. And what else was really able to provide you with a lot of value? Home underdogs within the conference. The only team that had less than 50% as a home underdog. Bakersfield 5-6 against the spread as home underdog. Riverside was 4-4 against the spread in this role. You had Fullerton and UC Davis go 3-2 against the spread as a home underdog. Cal Poly 5-3-1. Long Beach State 6-3 against the spread as a home underdog. And then CSUN, Cal State Northridge, they covered all three of their games as a home underdog. UC Santa Barbara, obviously a small sample size of 1, but 1-0 there. So those are the betting trends and just some of these styles of play that we can expect out there in the Big West. Coming up next, how about if we break down these rosters, take a look at the realignment and so much more with our good friend Connor Opa of Sleepers Media and so much more right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Inside Edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. this man has joined me for the Big West Conference Preview Edition for, I would say, at least 5 years now, and he's so reliable in terms of taking a look at these West Coast teams, whether it's the WCC, the Big West. I'm sure he's going to do a great job this year with the new look Pac-12, which is a little bit different than what we've seen in the past, but Connor Ope, he's just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the college basketball landscape. He is a co-host for House for Kraus podcast. He does some great work over at Sleepers Media and so much more. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter /X at Hoops Hope CBB all together. And Connor, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always love to chop it up about the Big West.
Oh, absolutely. It is a lot of fun. And how about if we start with some new members? Because there are some of the teams that we've been talking about for many, many years that we'll get to in a few minutes. But Sacramento State is a newcomer. They might have the most notable coach in Mike Bibby because of everything they did at the NBA level. But I'm sure you're aware as well as I was in the Big Sky last year. They were great at home. They were absolutely awful away from home. What are our expectations for a Sacramento State team that I look at the roster with Larry Hughes and company, and the roster on paper is great? I have a lot of questions with Mr. Bibby and his coaching, though.
Yeah, the roster should be pretty good. I think roster-wise, it all starts at the guard position with Mikey Williams. I don't want to say he's one of the more controversial players in college basketball. Obviously, he's played a season already with Sacramento State, but he's one of those guys who he's all scoring, right? Like, he can put up numbers. He did so in the Big Sky. I really do think that he is the end-all be-all for their transition into this conference. They're not a very big team. Sacramento State is. They're going to start 3 players that are 6'4" or shorter. But between Mikey Williams and then Larry Hughes, the senior, this team can put the ball in the basket. And I think that's going to be really fun to watch. We'll see how they scheme against teams like UC Irvine and UC Santa Barbara. But it's going to be fun basketball, even if it might not be the best basketball in the conference.
Absolutely. I do think that we're in for some fun, and we'll see if the defense can be a little bit better because that was a little bit of an issue. And then another team that comes into this conference, Cal Baptist. They were the last team to ever get the auto bid from the WAC in the NCAA tournament. Lots of changes, though. Rick Croy was the coach for this team last year, now over at Arizona State. So we'll see what he's able to do as the associate coach there. Now Kyle Getter is going to look to get her done, was part of the Notre Dame coaching staff. They do bring back Jordan Mueller from last year, a guy that was able to dole it out, give you a little bit of three-point shooting, and they went a little bit of the Division II route with Terry Connor, who was really good over at Oklahoma Baptist. They brought in a few former WAC guys as well, and Chris Impakpa from Tarleton State. Want to get your thoughts here, because with Cal Baptist, the identity of this team so long was just being able to hit the boards and having Dominique Daniels. It feels like a little bit of a new dawn and a new day for Cal Baptist, and ironically enough, a new conference.
Yeah, I mean, Cal Baptist last year was a little bit of I think the opposite maybe of Sacramento State, a little bit more defensive than they were offensive. They're another team, and I'm going to say this a lot about teams in the Big West being small, specifically going up against teams like UC Irvine, UC Santa Barbara, UC San Diego. If you lack that size, and we'll talk about UC Irvine later, if you lack that size, it's going to be really tough to get points, especially in the paint. Between Connor and Mueller, Ethan Duncan coming in from Lipscomb, I don't think all 3 can start. All 3 are 6 foot maybe on a good day, but they're going to be probably the top 3 offensive weapons for this Cal Baptist team. It's a young team beyond that, and I just think there's going to be some growing pains, maybe some more growing pains for Cal Baptist joining the Big West, because they don't have the same alpha scorers that Sacramento State has, where, nothing's going to scare Mikey Williams and Larry Hughes at Sacramento State from scoring, at least. I think Cal Baptist might take a little bit of a step backwards defensively joining this new conference, and then offensively, time will tell where their points come from and how they're able to rotate through what is a very, very small backcourt.
Yep, I agree with you there. As Connor Opie does such great work over at Sleepers Media and so much more. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And then the other team that is joining this conference, they are now the lone team outside the state of California. That'd be Utah Valley. For the longest time, it was Hawaii. They now go off to the Mountain West. But what do we make out of a Utah Valley team that they were so close at making the NCAA tournament so many different times out there in the WAC? They just couldn't quite break through. But a team that's won, I believe, 25 plus games each of the last 2 years, we know that this team is built on size. We know that this is a team that's built on defense, but also a team that did have a very difficult time taking care of the ball on offense last year.
Yeah, Utah Valley steps in, and if they're not the favorite, which I don't think they will be, they're immediately in that top four with the three schools I named: UCSD, UC Santa Barbara, UC Irvine. They have the size, they have the experience. Isaac Davis offensively can do some great things. He's a bigger wing. Braden Housley is coming in. He's a junior. He's been at Utah Valley for a year. Tanner Davis, a transfer from Utah Tech. They have the size on the wings. And I think that Sherman Weatherspoon can take a step forward as a shooter to space the floor a little bit for this team, where the competition level in the Big West is a little bit better, if we're being generous to the WAC than the WAC. But there's just so much continuity on this Utah Valley team, and the pieces that they added, I think, do a good job of filling in maybe some of the holes that they would have had joining the Big West. So Utah Valley is, for my money, one of the most consistent mid-major programs out west. And I think that they're going to do a really good job competing in that top four, competing for an auto bid come March. I just think they're set up defensively, especially, to hold their own at the top of the Big West.
Yep, they're always such a great defensive team. They do a nice job on the boards, really generated a lot of turnovers last season as well. And when I take a look at this team, I think it's fair to say that they're not going to be towards the top of the conference with Cal State Bakersfield. It's a very much new look team this year, as Todd Lee, who coached up South Dakota for quite a long time, and he wasn't too bad there. 66-52 in his 4 years over at South Dakota. He now takes over. Now things have changed a lot since he was a coach over at South Dakota quite a few years ago, and that was a team, his last team, that did struggle a little bit on defense. I like the fact that they bring in Bryce Cofield, was within the conference over at Cal State Fullerton. If I'm not mistaken, they brought back one or two guys like a Jaden Alexander, and KJ Bradley is a nice roll of the dice coming over from San Diego and was just banged up last year. Want to get your thoughts on Cal State Bakersfield, because I actually feel like the starting five is not too bad. I just really fear that not having a lot of depth might doom this team, though.
Yeah, not having a lot of depth. Some teams you look at in this conference, for the most part, you're like, okay, they can be good defensively, or they can be good as an offensive team. There's just nothing I look at with this Bakersfield roster that in year one inspires me. They've got the pieces, they've got some size on the wings. But again, some of these games against some, like Irvine, will run you 10, 11 players deep in games. And I just think that, when you have Cofield, Alexander, Barnes, and Bradley, and maybe Podette, like that five is going to play probably 30 plus minutes apiece. And I think as long as the season is, and as physical and as up-tempo as some of these games in the Big West specifically can be, I just think they're going to run out of gas a lot of the time.
Yep, I am right there with you. I think that that's a big fear for them, and they'll probably run out of gas against a team like this, as Cal State Fullerton just gunned it last year. Like, this was never a team that was ever super duper fast, and they do bring back a really nice guard from last year, Christian Williams, who gave the team multiple assists, 9 points per game, nearly 2 steals per contest. They went the Division II route. Matthew Wellenborg, he was a guy that was averaging like 20 points, 9 rebounds at the D2 level for Central Oklahoma. Like him, another guy from the Division II ranks in Tiernan Steins, hopefully I got that correct, from Quincy College. He was solid, and then you bring back a big man like a Kendrick DeLuna. For Fullerton, they were a big surprise last year, and I don't know if they're going to be back in like the top 5 or anything like that, but for Fullerton, after things were disastrous 2 years ago, the program got back online last year, and I think it's big that they bring back Williams in that backcourt.
Yeah, you bring back Williams. I've had a lot of conversations with Dedrick Taylor. When Fullerton made their run to the tournament, they played very up-tempo. They turned defense into offense, and they just ran down the court and scored before defenses could get set up. I think that's what he has always wanted to get back to. He just hasn't had the personnel on his roster to do that. But you look at the players on this roster, and a lot of times what slows you down to a half-court offense is the fact that your bigs and your bigger wings can't get down the floor at the same rate that your guards can. And so if your guards don't score on an initial attack, you're forced to wait and play a half court offense. Kendrick DeLuna can get down the floor like that. I think, we'll see what Reynolds does in this offense, the transfer from NAU. But they can run deep. They've got probably 3 seniors in the rotation, 2 to 3 juniors. I don't think they're going to play any freshmen. That level of experience with what their defense can be. And again, Taylor's teams have always based their identity on the defensive end. If they can generate turnovers, get boards, get out in transition, push the pace, this is a team that can compete and get into that top 5, top 4 in the conference. I just don't know, for me personally, outside of Williams, if there's really a secondary guard that I trust. Bailey Nunn was okay. He's more of a shooter than I think a facilitator, but he was that facilitator for Sacramento State 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So if they can get to that where they're running a 2-guard lineup at points, they're spreading the ball around, they're getting out in transition, like they can be really good. I just think if they can't generate those turnovers, there are teams defensively that I think can shut them down.
Absolutely, as we do have Connor Hope, who does such great work over at Sleepers Media and so much more, joining me for the Big West Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And then this team, I think, is interesting because they lose pretty much 99% of their minutes from a season ago, and Cal State Northridge, CSUN. But that said, in Andy Newman, I trust. I feel like he has shown that he is one of the more underrated coaches. Forget about the Big West, but really, in my opinion, mid-major college basketball, what he's done with this program over the last few seasons. And they got big news towards like the beginning part of May with BJ Omot. We don't know if he's going to be fully healthy, but last we saw him at North Dakota in a full season, guy was a terror with 16 points, 4 boards per contest. Love that this team has been built over the last few years around good rebounding, and I think it's going to be a little bit more adventurous this year taking a look at the roster. But Makai Balu comes over from Portland. He's a guy that's a mixer and shaker. Caleb Smith was a 7 rebound per game guy over at Rider. Brooklyn Hicks is a guy that was a nice little mixer and shaker as well over at Montana. Want to get your thoughts on Northridge, because I do look at this team and I think it really does hinge on Omot actually being healthy, and a lot of new pieces. I feel like this is one of those teams that could struggle early but be able to catch some steam late, just because I'm a big believer in Andy Newman being able to get these guys all on page.
Yeah, for better or for worse, Andy Newman is always going to play Andy Newman ball. If Fullerton plays fast, Andy Newman is going to turn that tempo up. He doesn't even care sometimes if the ball ends up in the stands because the communication is not there. And he knows at Northridge, he has to be a team that's willing to just play up tempo and get out ahead of this defense, because at Northridge, you're not going to get the same talent that you're going to get even at a UC Irvine or UC Santa Barbara. No, I like this roster. They've got Ballou, they've got Akisi from Oregon State, Dial Martin from LMU, Quentin Webb from New Mexico, Brooklyn Hicks from Montana also played at UNLV. So they've got a lot of transfers from the WCC, the Mountain West. And I like that. It's an experienced roster, but a roster with experience playing against players that are at a level above what the Big West is. And so they were all bit role players at their previous stops, but this roster, the way it's come together, and this is the one place where I'm not even going to criticize the size because of how fast they play. They're going to play one player over 6'5", 6'6", right? The only player that really has any size is Jael Martin, but all of their guards and wings are long and big. It's just the front court that's a bit undersized, the center position specifically. But I trust Jael Martin to be faster than Olivier Roux for UC Irvine. Like, they can get out in front of some of these bigger centers and score in transition. So I always love watching Cal State Northridge play in the Big West. I like that up-tempo style. I think the only thing that could hurt them is efficiency, because none of these transfers have been big role players at any of their previous stops. And I think part of that is the fact that there isn't really, besides Omot, like you said, one highly efficient player on this team, at least from their previous stop. But if there's a team that could finish in the bottom of the Big West that I would want to watch every game, it's Cal State Northridge.
No doubt about it. You know that there's going to be a lot of entertainment there, and this is another team that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. That'd be Cal Poly. Under Mike DeGeorge, they've been able to turn things around, and this is a team that is absolutely going to move it. Now, they do lose Hamad Musa, who's averaging 20 points per game. That's rough, but they retained three other top five scorers in terms of raw scoring last year, with Caden Ward being the main of them. They should be able to get a clean bill of health for Jess Esso-Isis, who's at 6'10", a freshman that comes over from France. Is able to pop it from three, give this team a little bit more size than what they had a season ago. Want to get your thoughts on Cal Poly, because while they lose their main guy in Musa, they do bring back well over 50% of their minutes, which is really hard to do at the mid-major ranks. And want to talk about a team that's going to gun it. Cal Poly, if Cal State Northridge is going to try to run it, Cal Poly is going to try to top them too.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of this. It'll slow down when we get to some of the teams at the top of the conference, but if there's any coach that has done a better job at the mid-major level, just resurrecting a program from absolute, like, if they didn't finish last, if they finished second to last, it was a successful season for them. To now, like, legitimately can beat every team in the conference. They've got shooters everywhere. Even their bigs, like Jess Esso-Isis, can shoot the ball. He shoots like, I think, 40% from three. He can step out and shoot it. I think their defensive efficiency last year was a bit misleading. I think they should be better than that. But it's not a team that's going to pride itself on the defensive end. But it is a team that is going to put pressure on you to score with just how much and how efficient they can be from the perimeter. They don't need to get to the rack like some of these other teams need to score. And I think that's going to benefit and has benefited them in the Big West in the past couple of years. But just again, it's very, like, most of these players were on the team last year. Like you said, it's system continuity. It's another year in the program. And I think that's going to benefit them when you look at them versus some of the other teams that are going to be kind of riding in the middle of this conference.
Yep, I agree with you. And then there was another very successful Division II coach that made the move for the Big West. For Gus Argenal, was a little bit of a tumultuous year number one over at UC Riverside. They had a tough time taking care of the ball. And I think the big question that I've got right now for this team is depth. Because Denzel Hines, I think they could get back to the form that he had after being limited to 6 games last year. Has always been a solid rebounder at all of his stops. DeAndre Partiti, hopefully you got that correct, right around about 7 points, 2.5 assists per game. And then they bring in James Evan from CSUN, so he knows the conference. But I would say outside their main, like, 5 or so guys, they also bring in Tony Duckett, who we remember him from San Diego a few seasons ago being a 10-point per game scorer. I just don't know if they've got those guys that can come in off the bench and be able to provide depth, unlike so many of the other teams here in the Big West.
I think with Duckett, I think the benefit you have is that he had a year in a Randy Bennett system. There's not really like a definitive point guard on this roster because Bertit's very much a scoring guard. So it's between, Aiden Rice, who's transferring up to the D1 level, or Tony Duckett. And I think that Duckett can be that point guard. At San Diego, he was more of a point guard than he was at St. Mary's. Obviously, St. Mary's had much better point guard play, so he wasn't forced to be. He was coming in really to be like a end of game player for St. Mary's. But I think the year in that program, if he's going to become a winning player, you can't really find a better coach to teach players how to win than Randy Bennett, at least not at the mid-major level. So, UC Riverside, and this is what kind of sucks with UC Riverside historically has not been a good athletics program. They almost cut the athletics program. Their basketball program has been historically not very great. And I think the years of Mike Magpio before he left kind of gave a false sense of hope for what this program can be. I think I have more faith in Bakersfield figuring out how to make it work with 6 players that play in their rotation, 7 players that play in their rotation than I do UC Riverside. But again, DeAndre Petit can put the ball in the basket. And they've got some players transferring up that have been good scorers. Like offensively, it should be a good team. I just think defensively, this Riverside team is set up for failure.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And when Argenal was at the Division II ranks, his teams generate a lot of turnovers. There wasn't much of that last season as well. And when it comes to Long Beach State under Chris Acker, it's been a little bit tumultuous for them the last few years. I do think that bringing in Noah Ammenhauser was big. Didn't necessarily see a ton of minutes over at Oregon State. At Coastal Carolina as a 7'2" big man. He was rock solid down low. They get even more size with Caleb Smith coming over from Grand Canyon. Right now, the big question mark I have is who's going to be the main point guard because they bring in someone like Jaden Tengen, who he was over at Cal State Monterey Bay of the Division II ranks. He was solid, and Yohan Sissoko actually was pretty solid over at Florian Lank last year, but that absence of really knowing who's going to be doling out the ball for Long Beach State has me having a lot of questions with this team.
Colin Ruffing can play a little bit of point guard. With Long Beach State, it's going to be a little bit of point guard by committee, which when Acker was the assistant at San Diego State, like there were years where they had a point guard, but really like the playmaking was generated by a couple of different players. I think that could be the case here. I like the way the roster is set up. I like the fact that you've got the two definitive bigs, whether they play them at the same time at the power forward and center position, or whether it's really just a two-man rotation at the five. I don't know. But Sissoko, I think, is a huge add because he's a guard that he didn't shoot high volume. He played 10 minutes a game or whatever it was at FAU. But when he did shoot the ball from deep, the ball went in the basket. And I think you surround a guard with two bigs, with a couple of shooters in Sissoko. I still trust Jack Payne to improve his shooting from what it was at 32% last year at Idaho. I see where Acker is going with this roster. I agree with you. I just don't know, even if you play point guard by committee, if you have the playmaking to bring it all together.
Yep, right there with you. And that is the big question that I have because they've got some solid players, but don't know where that is going to be necessarily going. As joining me on the show, we've got our good friend Connor Hope right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. Does great work over at Sleepers Media. And how about if we get into more of the big boys here? As UC Santa Barbara, they're bringing back Mario Little, and that is big because he dealt with injury last year, but an absolute stat sheet stuffer for this team. And I just look at Joe Pasternak. He has had so many good teams. Last year, the team was uncharacteristically a little bit rough on defense. I think that they're going to restore a little bit of that roar. They bring in someone like an Eric Dabami, who was really good over at Florida National as a freshman last year. Antonio Chall, he should be able to help out with his overall versatility. Marvin McGee is someone that comes in from within the conference. You've got CJ Shaw, who's back after he gave the team 12 points per game. Vajami Vartinen, I always get that name mixed up, over at Weber State. I look at UC Santa Barbara, I like the depth, and while Aiden Mahaney was a great scorer, he was, in my opinion, a little bit of a defensive liability, and I do think that with this overall roster, they should be better on the defensive side of things.
Yeah, they're going to be, for my money, the best offensive team in the conference, and it might not be all that close. You mentioned Myro Little, CJ Shaw, RJ Smith coming over from DePaul. He's a very aggressive scorer, and he played at DePaul in the Big East. He played at Colorado in the Big 12. Like, he brings that high major pedigree with him. You've got Viljami Vartiainen, my turn to mess with names. But he shot 42% from deep at Weber State as kind of a bigger wing for this level. I've always liked watching Marvin McGee play when he was at Cal State Bakersfield, but also even last year for UC Santa Barbara. He shot, 37%, I think, from deep. He can finish at the rack. He was a 65% shooter at the rim, 6'7". Like, he is the prototypical power wing that can also step back and shoot. And they have 5 seniors and 2 sophomores that are going to be in this rotation. Like, they're an old team. Today's age of college basketball, I love experience so much. And I think that that's going to do wonders for this team when it comes to competing for a title. We'll see how the defensive end goes, but I trust their offense so much that I don't know if the gap on the defensive end between them and UC Irvine is going to really matter.
I agree with you. And then when I take a look at this team, I think it might be the most balanced team in the conference. That's UC San Diego. No longer do they have Eric Olin, but the transfer of power for them was very successful. You bring back Tom Beatty, you bring back Leo Beth, a pair of double-figure scorers from a season ago, and Alex Shulkin was shooting 39% from 3 last year, made that seamless transition on over from the Patriot League. They bring in Ramir Barno, and we shall see if you get anything out of Ty Dunn, who he put up good numbers over at Buffalo last year. He was was inefficient over at Buffalo, but now because he missed all of last year, he had a year to be able to take in the system, which might not be a bad thing. Bringing Kate Dodson from Loyola Chicago as well. Want to get your thoughts here on UC San Diego, because they might not dominate one aspect of basketball, but they really don't have any true weaknesses either.
And it's one of those, again, this is a team that might give up some size down low, but they also have a ton of size on the perimeter. I was going to mention Dodson because for as bad as things were for Loyola Chicago, Dodson shot 38% from deep on 163 attempts. Like he can stroke it, and you're just dropping him into a team that's already ready to compete for a Big West title. Again, they're experienced. They're going to have 5 seniors, 2 juniors in their rotation. Like you said, they're probably the second best defense and the second best offense in the conference. And so you can argue that maybe Utah Valley's offense is a little bit better. But for my money, I think this UC San Diego team might be the most efficient both ways in the conference.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And then we've got one last team, and that would be UC Irvine. They bring in quite literally the biggest transfer in all of college basketball, 7'9" Olivier Roux. Certainly conditioning might be a little bit of an issue there, but when you're UC Irvine, you bring in a guy that's 7'9" for an Irvine team that was already number 1 in all of college basketball and opponent's 2-point shooting percentage last year. A team that time and time again is one of the better shot blocking teams in all of college basketball. That's big. Harrison Carrington, he's back after he had 8.5 points per game. And with this Russell Turner style, they don't bring in a ton of transfers. Ryu is obviously the biggest of them. They've got Eli Cho who comes back down low as well. But this is one of the best mid-majors in the country of having guys that maybe had a solid role the previous year, a little bit more of an ancillary role, and those guys stepping into bigger roles the next year. And I have no doubts that this UC Irvine team is once again going to be humming.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about, was it Long Beach State, who has, Emmenhauser, who's 7'2", Caleb Smith, who's 6'10". UC Irvine has Olivier Roux, who's 7'9", and Eli Chol, who's 7 foot. So they are down low, at least the biggest team. I think Russ Turner does a really good job of balancing things out. He always has really good, really big centers on his teams. He likes to have that body down low to block shots, to make it almost impossible to score in the paint. But then he surrounds them with guys like Tama Isaac at the point guard position, Harrison Carrington, who did a lot better than I expected him to coming over from Colorado, but I still think that there's more there for him to do as a wing. Torian Lee as a kind of scoring guard, Javon Jester, like you've got 3 point guards on this roster, 2 bigs, and then you've surrounded them with some really good, really young wings. I like, they're missing for me that like quintessential UC Irvine big wing to play at the 4, but you put 2 7-footers on the floor, or an 8-footer almost and a 7-footer, and then you bring Emeneki off the bench at 6'10", and that's what he's going to do. Like you look down their roster, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe even 10 players that I already know are going to play at least 7 minutes a game. That's just what Russ Turner does. So you mentioned conditioning, like that's never really been an issue on Russ Turner teams, even when he's had players that might have had issues with conditioning, simply because even your stars aren't playing significant minutes. He's been known to play multiple walk-ons 15 to 20 minutes a game some seasons. So I think this team defensively is going to be the best team in the conference. I think where you might lose it a little bit is we're still waiting to see guys like Roux really step up offensively. Obviously, it's a lot tougher to do in the SEC, but I think there's not really a guy on this roster that I point to and go, yeah, that is a guy who can get you buckets in the paint when you need it. And that might ultimately be what kind of sinks them to second or third in the conference.
Well, a guy that always gets us buckets on this podcast and always comes through, that'd be you, Connor. You do such great work looking at this great game of college basketball all 12 months out of the year over at Sleepers Media and so much more. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media to other platforms.
Yeah, right now, just focusing on House of Kraus, Gonzaga podcast. We are, obviously Gonzaga's still in the works trying to get some European transfers. So we'll see how that goes. But once the season starts up again, I'll be at Sleepers Media doing game previews, game recaps, and all of that. It's like the slowest time of the year for college basketball because teams aren't practicing, teams aren't playing overseas yet, but a majority of the offseason player movement has kind of come to a grinding halt, with the exception of now of those European players. So not much other than talking to you, Greg, about the Big West on my end, but I think we'll be coming out with an episode or two of House of Kraus discussing Gonzaga basketball in the coming weeks.
Absolutely, and it's going to be fun looking at the Pac-12 for this upcoming season with Gonzaga. New dawn and a new day for them, just like with the Big West. But one thing that's consistent, our good friend Connor always delivering the goods. So big thanks, Connor, for joining me on Coast Soups, now part of the VC Family Podcast. Coming next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector finish for the Big West. Here, lovely Las Vegas, for Coast Soups with myself, Greg Oops Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Connor Ope. He does such amazing work over at Sleepers Media. I believe that he still does a little bit over there at Basket Under Review and so much more. He does an incredible job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends great insights. He has joined me for many, many years on this Big West Conference Preview Edition, so big thanks to him for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector finish for the Big West, and as per usual with these conference preview podcasts, I want to give as much sparkle and shine as humanly possible to the conferences themselves. So all the news and notes in college basketball I might have missed for Thursday, I will sum those up on the podcast tomorrow. We're starting to slow things down, aside from when Dusty May decides to go to the NBA, but I'll make sure that gets all taken care of. We have to have these as standalone podcasts. Like I said at the first segment, if you're listening to this in late June, July, August, September, you should be able to get a good feel for the Big West, get some good information for the upcoming college basketball season. So I do keep these as standalone. So how about if we go with my projector or finish at dead last? We're going to be going with Cal State Bakersfield, meet for the Roadrunners. Now, I actually don't think that Todd Lee is a bad coach. He was 66-52 in 4 seasons at South Dakota. I know that they played a few non-Division I teams there. I just don't know how well he's going to be able to acclimate to this conference. His last South Dakota team was a top 25 team in terms of defensive rebound percentage. They didn't turn the ball over a lot, but they're also about 298th in the country in terms of points per possession allowed on defense. They do bring back Jaden Alexander, who he was averaging about 9.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, and Bryce Cofield coming over from Cal State Fullerton, 10 points, 5 boards, 2.5 assists per game. They're going to be banking on KJ Bradley, who comes over from San Diego, average about 14.5 points per game, but not a lot of depth here. You have question marks with the big men. Cameron Barnes, he was averaging about 2 rebounds per game over at Illinois State about 2 seasons ago. Chadi Dumrama, hopefully I got that correct, he was averaging about 5 points, 4 rebounds per game over at Arkansas State last season. Like, the starting 5 is not awful here, but what you're going to get outside that starting 5, whether or not that Todd Lee style is going to be able to fit with this conference, I'm giving the deficit of the doubt here. So with Bakersfield dead last in my projector to finish, number 11, we're going to be going with Long Beach State. They were actually relatively good on the defensive glass last year, 61st in terms of defensive rebound percentage, and 7'2" Noah Ammenhauser should be able to help out down low. He had 5 points per game over at Oregon off the bench last season. 2 years ago over at Coastal Carolina, 11 points, 6 boards per contest, and then we got Caleb Smith, who comes in from Grand Canyon, glued to the bench last year, but over at UC Riverside a few seasons ago, 11.5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game, so that's going to help out. I like Jack Payne coming over from Idaho, about 4 boards per game as a 6'6", little bit of a combo player. They're going to be really banking on the Division II Cal State University of Monterey Bay transfer, Jaden Teagan, to really get the offense going, though. 17 points, shot about 36.5% from 3, a little bit over 2 assists per game, and Yohan Sissoko was a 43% three-point shooter over at Florida Atlantic last season. Problem was he didn't necessarily play a lot over at Florida Atlantic last season. Again, you've got some depth issues. This is a bunch I think is going to be turning the ball over quite a bit because they really don't have that hardcore main point guard. They're going to be looking at Colin Ruffin as well, coming over from Lindenwood, and I just haven't loved the Chris Acker era here for Long Beach State. So at number 11 in my projector finish, I'm going to be going with Long Beach State. At number 10, I go with UC Riverside. For Riverside, they bring back DeAndre Petriti. Hopefully I got that correct. 7 points, 3 rebounds, about 2.5 assists per game. And then I really like what Denzel Hines is able to give you down low. 7.2 points, 6.2 rebounds per game, limited in 6 games due to injury last season, but a guy that has been around the block, if I'm not mistaken, over at Coastal Carolina a few seasons ago, was a relatively solid big man. James Evans, he was over at Cal State Northridge last year, averaging 6 points per game, familiarity with the conference. Got a guy in Tony Douglas Duckett, who was a double-figure scorer over at San Diego 2 seasons ago before spending last year on the bench of St. Mary's. And Abraham O'Deer, he was over at West Virginia last year. He was on the bench, but he should be able to help out this offense. It was a team that really just, it felt like they were trying to get down the Gus Argenal system. His teams, when he was at the Division II ranks, were really good in terms of winning the turnover battle last year, 323rd in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis on defense, 313th in terms of points per possession overall. I think that things iron out, and I think that Argenal does a better job here this year. So with Riverside, I've got them at number 10 in my projector finish. Number 9, I am going to be going with Cal Baptist. They have to replace Rick Croy, who was a really good coach. He heads on over to Arizona State with Kyle Getter, who was a part of the Notre Dame coaching staff last year. He was their associate coach, and they do bring back Jordan Mueller. He was solid, 4.5 points, 2 assists per game, shot 35% from three-point range. And Terry Connor, he was over at Division II Oklahoma Baptist last year. He was a guy that was a menace, did a little bit of everything, 19.5 points, 3.5 boards, 3.5 assists, 1.8 steals, shot 37% from three-point range. But where this team was just so tick was down low last year. Now they're relying upon Chris Impekba, who comes over from Tarleton State, averaged about 8 points, 5.5 boards, and a block per contest to really be able to uplift this team. Ethan Duncan was a nice sixth man over at Lipscomb last year, 10.5 points, 36.5% three-point shooter, but you just lose so much of that size last season. Last year, this team was great down low, top 40 team in terms of opponents' two-point shooting percentage, top 20 team in terms of rebound percentage. Getter, I don't know if he's going to be able to get her done. I've got this Cal Baptist team at number 9 in terms of my projector finish. At number 8, I'm going to be going with Cal State Northridge, aka CSUN. They lose their top scorer in Larry Hughes II, who was just so good, and frankly, they lose over 99% of their minutes from a season ago. This is more or less in a trust in Andy Newman sort of approach to put him in front of a team like a Cal Baptist or a UC Riverside, because they bring in Brooklyn Nix. He was over at Montana last year. He was able to average about 4 boards, shot 37% from 3 points with 9 points per game. Makai Balu, who was over at Portland, he was a nice, solid part-time starter, was able to give you 9 points per game. Caleb Smith, 7 points, 7 boards, steal per contest last season over at Ryder. There's not a lot that you necessarily love with this roster, other than if you can get a clean bill of health from BJ Omot. Omot, he was just on the bench last season, and he was unable to get out there on the floor as well with injury over the last few seasons because he was supposed to play at Cal. I believe that he was over at Minnesota for a year or two as well, but last we saw him in a full season, 2023-24 season over at North Dakota, 16.5 points, 4.2 rebounds per game. He's been limited to just 4 games over the last few seasons due to injury, so that's something that's going to hurt this team, but this Northridge team was top 40 team in terms of defensive rebound percentage last year. They also shot about 67% at the free throw line, but in Andy Newman, I trust. Number 8 in my projector finish, going to be going with CSUN. At number 7, I'm going with Sacramento State. Now, Sacramento State, if you look at just raw talent and raw talent alone, this team should be able to weasel their way into the top 3 of the conference. The problem is, I just have absolutely zero faith whatsoever in Mike Bibby. We saw them win I think 0 games on the road last season. Like, they could not win a game outside the Beehive to save their lives. Like, you bring back Mikey Williams, 17 points, 3 boards, 4.5 assists, steal per contest last year. Larry Hughes, who I mentioned, is leaving CSUN. He was their top scorer, 17.5 points per game. Marcus Wilson, 12.5 point per game scorer over at UC Davis. They've got familiarity with the conference. You've got Armand Mahdi back after he had 7 points, a little bit over a steal per contest. Josh Glover was able to give you a little bit of something, but this team lacked the fundamentals. They actually took good care of the ball, top 30 team in terms of field turnovers on a per possession basis, thanks to Mikey Williams, but 295th in defensive rebound percentage, 340th in opponent's 2-point shooting percentage. Rudvan Tudic, he's going to help out with that, 7 points, 7.8 rebounds per game, but again, until I see Mike Bibby rack up some road wins, I just can't trust in the Sacramento State team. So, number 7 in my projector finish, we're going to be going with Sac State. And number 6, I'm going with Cal State Fullerton. Fullerton is bringing back quite a few solid players from a season ago, and for Fullerton, they absolutely moved it. They were a top 5 team in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and with this Fullerton team, bringing back Christian Williams is big. He was one of the main guards last season, a part of a team that did a nice job protecting the ball. 2 steals, 2 assists, 3.5 boards, 9 points per game, and shot 37% from 3-point range. Matthew Wellenborg, he was over at Division II Central Oklahoma. He was a menace. 20.5 points, 9 boards, a steal, 3 blocks per contest. Shot 34.5% from 3-point range. So I'm loving what they got there. They're really banking on these Division II guys because you've got Tiernan Steins, who comes over from Division II Quincy, 15.5 points, 5.5 boards, 2.5 assists, steal per contest, nice three-point shooter. And then you also bring back 6'10" Kendrick DeLuna. Didn't see a big role last season. He was a starter, but he didn't see a lot of minutes, about 5 points, 2.5 rebounds per game. But I think that he'll be able to elevate the team. They need to be able to be a little bit better on the offensive glass. They rebounded 21.6% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. That was 348th in all of college basketball. But with this Fullerton team, I think that bringing back Christian Williams keeps them towards the middle part of the conference. I've got Fullerton number 6 in terms of my projector finish. At Mambo number 5 in my projector finish, we're going to be going with Cal Poly. 3 of the team's top 5 scorers are back from a team that they did the little things well last year. I recognize that they were 310th in opponent's 2-point shooting percentage. They need to do a little bit better there with this Mike DeGeorge style. They're going to leave something to be desired down low, but they were 12th in the country in terms of free throw shooting percentage, over at 78.5%. You've got Guzman Velcic back. He was able to give the team 7.5 points, shot 37% from three-point range. How about Caden Ward, a guy that was able to give you 14.5 points, 6.5 rebounds per game. Jake Davis was a guy that really cooked with about 5 points per game. He's got some experience outside the conference as well. Kayron Elliott is another guy that gives you 5 points per game. And Jess Esoisis is a guy that had 8.5 points, right around about 3.5 rebounds per game, was limited due to injury, only played in 7 games, getting a clean bill of health for him. A 6'10" big man that shot over 41% from three-point range last season. That's big, and that's even bigger because this team loves to bomb it. They were 5th in terms of percentage of their shots that came from three-point range last year, over at 52.6%. I'm a big believer in Mike DeGeorge. This Cal Poly team has been sorry for so long. Having Caden Ward back in the folding company, I recognize that there are still some pieces that may not be back from season ago, but being able to retain much of the roster, even without a lot of transfer portal additions, I'm a big believer in this continuity. I've got Cal Poly at number 5 in my projector finish. And number 4, I'm going to be going with Utah Valley. With Utah Valley, it's going to be very interesting to see how they fare because they do lose so many guys like a Trayvon Leonard from a season ago. Isaac Davis, that's their top returning scorer. He had about 11 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, and Braden Housley, 5.5 points, 2.7 assists, 1.3 steals per game. I like what he brings to the table there. Now they're banking on Tanner Davis, who last year was over at Utah Tech. He averaged 1.7 steals, 7.5 points per game to take some nice strides forward, while Sherman Weatherspoon had about 5 points per game, 38% three-point shooter last season. I think that he takes a step forward as well. They retained some nice ancillary pieces from the season ago, but you do lose so many of those guys that were able to generate a lot of turnovers last season, and they bring in a guy from Barton Community College in Sebastian Musticic, hopefully you got that correct, of 12.5 points, 7.5 boards, 37.5% three-point shooter to be able to help things out. But you know with this Utah Valley style that you're going to get tough, tenacious defense. It's a Utah Valley team that has been through just a lot the last few seasons. They've been tough luck losers in terms of trying to make it to the NCAA tournament, but Todd Phillips has gotten this team to 25 plus wins in each of the last 2 seasons. I don't think that there's going to be a big fall off, and they are the lone team in this conference outside the state of California. So with Utah Valley, I've got them at number 4 in terms of my projector finish. Number 3, we're going to be going with UC Santa Barbara. For the Gauchos, on paper, they've got so much talent. Bringing back Mario Little, a guy that began his career over at Utah, and if I'm not mistaken, Baylor, that is a really good place to start because he's a guy that was banged up last season, but when he was out there, he was a nice little bit of a stat sheet. For 12 points, 5.5 boards, 4.5 assists, 1.3 steals per game. CJ Shaw is also back, 12 points at a steal per contest last year. And then you've got Vajami Vartinen from Weber State. He was a 13-point per game scorer that shot 42% from 3. RJ Smith, 6.5 points, 2.5 assists per game. Eric DeBami, who was really good over at Florida National as a freshman last year. Another guy that just stuffs the stat sheet. 9.5 points, 7.5 boards, 1.4 steals, 1.4 blocks per contest at 6'10", but it does feel like the coaching has been a little bit lackadaisical. The defense last year for Santa Barbara really took a step back, especially in terms of their three-point shooting defense. Now, was that a little bit of a byproduct of having a guy like an Ada Mahaney on the roster last year? We shall see. I do think that for Santa Barbara, Joe Pasternak is still a solid coach. We've seen things be a little bit more shaky after that 27-win season a few seasons ago where they made the NCAA tournament, though, so I do have to default to a few other teams at the top of this conference. For Santa Barbara, I've got them number 3 in terms of my projector finish. Number 2, I'm going to be going with old UC San Diego. For San Diego, it was year number 1 of not having Eric Golden at the helm, but they were able to do a nice job in terms of being able to maintain a lot of what made them still tick for last season. 3 of their top 5 scorers are back, including Leo Beth, 12 points, 5 boards, steal per contest. Tom Beatty, he was able to give you 10.5 points, 5.5 boards, 3.5 assists, 1.3 steals per contest, and Alex Shulkin, 9.5 points per game, 39% three-point shooter. Now you go out there, you get Ramir Barno. He was over at Florida Gulf Coast, 11.5 points, 5 assists, 1.4 steals per game. He's going to fit like a glove, and the big unknown, what you're going to get out of Ty Dunn. He was supposed to be the main point guard last season. 2 years ago over at Buffalo, he put up numbers, 12 points, 3.5 boards, 5.5 assists per game. He was also a nightmare in terms of taking care of the ball with 3.9 turnovers per game. Perhaps a full season off, being able to take in practices while he was a little bit banged up might help him out. And I do think that Cade Dodson, who was over at Loyola Chicago last year, and boy, Loyola Chicago was a wet match at a dark cave last year out there in the Atlantic 10, but still, guy at 10.5 points, 2 assists. He shot 38% from three-point range. I think he's going to fit this system really well. Maybe you don't have that true 7-footer that's going to like clog things up down low or anything like that, but San Diego, still a relatively good team on the defensive glass. Last year, top 70 team in terms of defensive rebound percentage. I think that they're going to be right towards the top of the conference. I've got them number 2 in my projector finish. And number 1, Zot, the UC Irvine Anteaters. You bring in the tallest player in college basketball history, 7'9" Olivier Roux. The only reason why Florida moved on from him was because with Florida, they just play an up-tempo system where not really conducive to having a guy that's 7'9", but I mean, the guy can dunk without even jumping, and it fits an Irvine team that was numero uno last season in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage, one of the best shot blocking teams in all of college basketball. And then you've got Tema Isaac back, about 6.5 points, 3.8 assists, steal per contest. Torin Lee, he was a nice ancillary piece, 37.5% three-point shooter with 4 points per game. And for Irvine, really outside of Ryu, you don't have a lot of transfers that are going to be coming in. You've got Eli Chul, who's back from a year ago, was a 33% three-point shooter at 6'11", so he's a big man that gives you a little bit more versatility, 4.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and a block per contest. And then Harrison Carrington, he was a nice ancillary piece at 6'7" last year, 8.5 points, 4 rebounds per game. We see it time and time again with this Russ Turner system. He does a great job in terms of being able to maintain his own. These guys that from 1 year, maybe they're a reserve, they're more of a role player, they take on a big role. I think that we're going to see that with this UC Irvine backcourt. I just trust in the system, and having a guy in Ryu for a team that's always so great on the boards, that's always so great down low, I think that it's, for lack of a better term, making the bad guy in the conference more bad. So UC Irvine, numero uno in terms of my projector or finish for the Big West, and that'll wrap things up for my Big West Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. A big thanks to our guy, Connor Ope. He's doing great work over at Sleepers Media and so much more. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one or two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larry CM, the me does not matter. So, as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast here in the offseason, getting you guys these conference previews, as you're going to get one for all 32 conferences, looking at the news and notes of college basketball and so much more. And then once we get in season picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.